If you close an ecosystem off from the room, like putting a lid on a jar, how long do you think it can stay in balance before the oxygen runs out? This system has been closed for 5 days now, and its seal isn't perfect yet, but it's part of a much longer experiment where I've been working towards a moment where I can finally step back and see how this ecosystem handles itself. Once it's closed like this, nothing is added and nothing is removed. The only energy coming in is light, temperature, and a little bit of movement from the outside of the system to represent tidal forces. Which means that the real question is, can this system and all of its organisms keep oxygen in balance in the same way as our own biosphere? That's what I've spent 6 years of development to find out, and finally, we've reached a moment where we're gonna have a result. But right before sealing everything, there was one major issue in the lake biome that had to be corrected. And that's because not everything I've added over the years has worked out as perfectly as I had hoped. The creeping primrose willow had completely taken over the water column in the lake biome, and it ended up turning into a dense tangled mass of stems and roots. It completely took over the lake and was incredibly effective at absorbing nutrients, so it made it very difficult to actually read what the system was doing. As most of that plant was removed, the water column opened up, and for the first time in a long while, it became possible to clearly see how the organisms were moving, feeding, and interacting throughout the lake over the course of a day. This is the lake biome just before I close the system, after removing most of the willow and before planting the tape grass. What you're seeing here is a lake packed with life that has been running on its own for over 3 years. It has grown to the ecosystem's carry capacity, which is right up to the limits of what this space and the energy from the light can support. Follow any one of these organisms and you'll find that it lives a very active life. Each one with a job to do, which is to collect as much energy as it can before the energy goes to the next one. You'll notice that the water stays almost completely still. The circulation you see comes entirely from the organisms themselves and the temperature differences in the water, much in the same way as it occurs in many of the small lakes in Florida that this biome aims to recreate. Across the bottom, the crayfish are constantly digging and rummaging through the sediment, pushing nutrients around as they look for worms. They're all born and raised in this lake over multiple generations, which means they're already deeply adapted to this environment and succeed with a population of about 2 dozen. This was the last clear look at the lake before I removed the rest of the willow and began planting the tape grass. The next day, I decided that more tape grass would be needed than what was already growing inside the lake biome. So I went out to the river and collected some free-floating plants along the water's edge. I removed most of the melted plant leaves and began adding them to the biome. About a dozen plants total were added to the system for a rough 1-to-1 swap in plant biomass. And by the next day, the water was expectedly murky, but full of life and what seemed like excitement. There was new opportunity for energy all throughout the biome, and the organisms are crawling all over the new grass. One of the behaviors that stands out here are the ram's horn snails. You'll see them make these trips up to the surface, pause to take in air, and then let themselves sink back down into the water again. They're air breathers, so it's kind of like they are some little scuba divers finding their meal underwater. Along with the tape grass, I also added a strapleaf sagittaria I found along the riverbank. already in rough shape, I added it mostly out of curiosity to see how the organisms here would respond to it. At this point along the journey, I begin adding water back into the chiller and start to fill each of the heat exchangers. I purge the air out of the system and add glycol to the mix so that low temperatures down to minus 30 degrees Celsius can be reached. The system is now fully closed and I wait to observe for any signs of low oxygen. And on land at night, I check to see if the isopods within the carbon dioxide vulnerable areas are behaving differently. And they all seem to be normal. But the first place I would expect to find problems is in the seagrass meadow biome. This is the place where medusa worms live, and they have been my canary in the coal mines of sorts. Because if the wave action of this biome ever stops, within hours they detect lower levels of oxygen better than any other creature and will quickly move up the glass to absorb whatever oxygen is left. And to my honest surprise, each morning the medusa worms are perfectly content within their benthic burrows. And so looking now at the lake biome after 5 days, I see that the crayfish have transitioned well into their normal routine. They regularly climb the stalks of these grass blades and nibble along the edges. The grass is producing a ton of oxygen across each blade, and it's like you can almost watch that energy move upward throughout the entire system. And I'm surprised to still see that the strapleaf Sagittaria remains after I fully expected that the plant would be shredded within a couple days. But even after a week of heavy grazing, it's still here, and the crayfish seem to have mostly moved on, which makes me really curious to see how it ends up fitting into the system long term. It will take time for the tape grass to form a meadow that's dense and highly productive, but unlike the willow, this grass will remain open enough for crayfish to dig, for snails to move, and for everything else to pass through the meadow naturally. When the willow was in the lake, it acted like a nutrient sponge, keeping the water column extremely clear. Right now, the lake looks a little hazy, but this is actually a healthy transition phase. Nutrients are moving through the water column again, algae is responding, and the rest of the food web is starting to follow. The algae growing on the glass might look like a problem in a typical aquarium, but here it's a positive sign. It means that food is being produced and made available, and I expect that to trigger a slow response in the snail population as they begin laying eggs again and increasing in numbers over time. As the tape grass continues to grow and occupy more of the lake floor, it should begin absorbing those nutrients directly, and the water column should gradually clear again, but this time into a very different structure than what the willow created. After 5 days fully closed, what I can say confidently is that the oxygen levels are holding and behavior across the system looks completely normal. And that matters more than anything else that I've tested so far. This was always the biggest question in the entire project, not whether plants would grow or animals would survive, but whether a living system like this could actually manage its own air once miniBIOTA was entirely closed. And so in a closed system like this, oxygen stress would show up in the water column first, especially in the lake, long before you'd ever see anything change on land. There will almost certainly be daily swings in oxygen and carbon dioxide as light cycles change, and that's exactly what should happen. But as carbon dioxide rises, plants respond by growing and producing oxygen, and life keeps negotiating its balance movement by movement. Could that balance still break? Absolutely. This is still early, and closed ecosystems can turn on a snap before you know it. But right now, I'm not seeing any warning signs. I'm seeing a living system doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And that's really exciting because it means that the experiment has finally entered its most important phase. From here on out, it's less about wondering whether the system could ever work, and more about moving forward and building a system that continues to expand and show what life is capable of as a network when it's given the space to do so. And so this is where things really start to get interesting. Before I end this, I want to thank everyone who supports miniBIOTA on Patreon. Your support helps keep this experiment going and makes it possible to keep building and observing the system over the long term. If you'd like to help support the project or see more behind the scenes updates, there's a link below. And whether you're supporting directly or just following along, thanks for being part of this.